Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a Entre Artes. Estamos hoy con un invitado muy especial. Estamos con Jack Hirschman, que nos acompaña desde Estados Unidos. Nació en 1933 en Nueva York, ha sido un poeta laureado, editor, traductor y un escritor absolutamente comprometido con las causas sociales. Bienvenido, welcome to Guayaquil. Estamos muy felices que estés acá.
I'm very happy to be here.
Jack, tú eres un poeta que pertenece a una generación muy importante, a la que se ha denominado generación Beat. Tal vez tú seas el último Beat de este grupo de escritores. ¿Qué nos puedes decir de este movimiento? ¿Qué nos puedes decir de los integrantes de esta generación?
I have published many books in the last 25 years in Italy. Many bilingual books. And I have always been associated, and they've even published poems of mine in Manifesto, the communist newspaper. They do so, or they did so, because I'm a communist. But 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, suddenly I am a member of the Beat generation, and the word communist no longer is in the manifesto. Now, ironically enough, the people in the Beat generation were friends of mine, and I read with them many times. With Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, who lived in California, in San Francisco, and we used to run around on the streets. And many of the Beat generation poets were friends. But you must understand, the Beat generation, ironically, began in the most elite university in New York City. Columbia University is the most elite university in New York. The difference was that Allen and Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs, when school was out, they went into the street downtown, and with the help of what I call shmoogadoo, which is marijuana, because the Beat generation doesn't have a philosophy, it's based on a substance. So the Beat generation actually was, paradoxically, it came from the most elite college in New York, yet they were, Allen, William, and Jack Kerouac, they were basically petty bourgeois anarchists. At the same time, Allen was almost, one would call him almost a communist. He was the bard of the Soviet period. The bard of the Soviet period was Allen Ginsberg was the bard. Even though his position was anti-communist, it was certainly he was very paranoid. He was very paranoid about the Soviet Union. At the same time, a great poet, Italian poet, whom I've also translated, Pier Paolo Pasolini, said that Allen Ginsberg was able to make brothers and sisters of so many people in the world that what he did didn't exist in Italy, which was ironically enough full of communists, but they didn't function that way, according to Pier Paolo Pasolini. Now, the real important thing about the Beat generation is that it was a foreshadow. For example, when Rosa Parks refused to move from her seat, it was the same year that Allen Ginsberg's Howl was published. So the Beat generation is connected, especially also with the inclusion of the Beat generation of the African-American Amiri Baraka, who was a close comrade of mine because we both were communists, worked for the communist movement. So you see that there's a relation between the Beat generation, these guys who had been in college, but also represent different aspects of American life, less to the inclusion, I must say, of the Latino or Chicano community. But you had the Jew and the Italian and the Irish. Kerouac was French Canadian, and Burroughs, ironically, came from a very wealthy family. The Burroughs, the Burroughs adding machines, that was his family. And that was the foreshadow of the civil rights movement out of New York, actually. Of course, New York was the center, and then San Francisco became. Because Alan wrote Howl in the same area that I live, in San Francisco, North Beach.
Bueno, también entonces sabemos ya esta causalidad de la literatura de esta generación, pero también origina el gran movimiento que viene a ser el posterior, como el movimiento hippie. También en ese sentido, la posición, primero la posición de izquierda, de la que ya has hablado, la posición comunista, también viene a generar una multiplicidad de acciones desde lo social, desde una postura antisistémica.
Yes. But remember, the civil rights movement began, but then the United States went to war against Vietnam. That was the difference. The hippie movement arose during that period. I, for example, had been a professor in the universities and at UCLA, and I was fired from UCLA for leading my students against the American war in Vietnam, and I broke some state laws in doing so.
Tu posición ante la guerra de Vietnam es muy radical. Tu poesía lo refleja muy bien. ¿En qué momento piensas que tuviste esa conciencia para escribir este tipo de poesía como una posición clara ante la humanidad?
When I was fired and I came into the street, it was 1966. The war had only just begun. I then translated a book. When I was fired, they left me only with a library card at the UCLA library. I found the book there by a Haitian poet, a poet of Haiti, René Depeste, called A Rainbow for the Christian West. It's a book about the voodoo gods invading the southern and most racist part of the United States, where the arsenals for the war in Vietnam were, that's where most of the arsenals were. And that was in 1968. In 1970, I wrote the book of the Vietnamese people based on a voodoo sect in Vietnam, with a sect which was forbidden during the Vietnam War by the Vietnamese. It was forbidden because the Vietnamese needed every man and woman to fight the American invaders. The sect is known as Dao Mao, the adoration of the mother. I visited this, after the war was over, the sect was of course returned and is practiced in Vietnam today. And in fact, in Northern California, there are 11 temples of this sect outside of San Francisco. I visited the sect. It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary sect. And I wrote a whole book that in 1970, I lost the book because I kept changing the title of the book. In 1996, I lost the book the last copy that I was sending. And then in 2012, my biographer, a woman, Alessandra Bava, in Rome, said, Jack, I have a birthday present for you. I found your book. I sent it to a group of activists in Boston, Vietnamese and non-Vietnamese. And when the war was over, they sold their archive to a small college in Philadelphia, Lafayette College. And then Sasha Bava, my biographer, convinced them that she was my biographer, and they released the book to me. Yes, translated. It's been published in the American language as I wrote it, in Oakland, California. It's been translated in Brussels, France, in French, been translated into Italy, and which I think is being translated into German as well.
Jack, tú tienes una muy importante labor como traductor. Traductor de poetas como Mallarmé, Mayakovsky, pero también poetas latinoamericanos como Neruda, Roque Dalton, Vallejo. ¿Qué acercamiento has tenido con la poesía latinoamericana?
Okay, this is your surprise. I translated a book by Roque Dalton, Poemas Clandestinos. Now usually, when I read a poem, I read it in the original language, but since I'm here in Ecuador, I want to read the translation that I did of this poem, which I regard as one of the great poems of this generation. I read it all the time, everywhere I can, for events. I just read it with Manlio Argueta from El Salvador, the great writer. He was in San Francisco, and I read the poem. Of course, he was very pleased. I'm going to read the translation that I wrote, that I did of this poem. And truly, it is a great poem. I say it before. It's a great poem. And then I'll read it also in Spanish. Act. In the name of those washing others' clothes and cleaning others' filth from the whiteness. In the name of those caring for others' children and selling their labor power in the form of maternal love and humiliations. In the name of those living in another's house, which isn't even a kind belly, but a tomb or a jail. In the name of those eating others' crumbs and chewing them still with the feeling of a thief. In the name of those living on others' lands, the houses and factories and shops, streets, cities and towns, rivers, lakes, volcanoes and mountains, always belong to others, and that's why the cops and the guards are there, guarding them against us, in the name of those who have nothing but hunger, exploitation, disease, a thirst for justice and water, persecutions and condemnations, loneliness, abandonment, oppression, and death. I accuse private property of depriving us of everything. In Spanish, en nombre de quienes lavan la ropa ajena y expulsan de la blancura la mugre ajena, en nombre de quienes cuidan hijos ajenos y venden su fuerza de trabajo en forma de amor maternal y humillaciones, en nombre de quienes habitan en vivienda ajena, que ya no es vientre amable, sino tumbo o cárcel, en nombre de quienes comen mendrugos ajenos y aún los mastican con sentimiento de ladrón, en nombre de quienes viven en un país ajeno, las casas y las fábricas y los comercios y las calles, las ciudades y los pueblos y los ríos y los lagos y los volcanes y los montes son siempre de otros, y por eso está ahí la policía y la guardia, cuidándolos contra nosotros, en nombre de quienes lo único que tienen es hambre, explotación, enfermedades, sed de justicia de agua, persecuciones, condenas, soledad, abandono, opresión, muerte. Yo acuso a la propiedad privada de privarnos de todo. That is a great poem. That is a great poem.
Thank you. Es un gran poema. Además, en base a este poema que has traído y que nos has regalado, Jack, tú tienes una militancia igual que Roque Dalton.
Yeah.
La misma militancia por las causas sociales. También, igual que Roque Dalton, fuiste perseguido en algún momento. Roque Dalton fue asesinado, pero tú has tenido también encarcelamiento por tu militancia política.
Oh, gracias. That's, gracias. We're all trying to change the way the system of capitalism works. It doesn't work anymore. We want to bring it down. We want to overthrow it. We're poets mainly and artists. And I think I mentioned this in the ride over here. This is important also too. I invented a word for the world poetry movement, which I work with Fernando Rendon and others in Medellin, Colombia. I invented a word which now has become the name of the newsletter where poets can submit work from everywhere in the world in their languages, hopefully that there could be an English translation, since English is more and more a basic language of the work. The newsletter is called Poetry Planetariat. I invented that word taking Giorgio Agamben, a great Italian philosopher, his idea that with everyone having computers and androids, and more people getting them everywhere in the world, that the idea of the old proletariat has been shifted. And ironically enough, to bring back the Beat Generation, Agamben says the computers and all will petty bourgeoisify the world. In other words, the world will become petty bourgeoisified. But that's not altogether negative, because within the petty bourgeoisified world, just as it was with Kerouac, Burroughs, and Ginsberg, the poem becomes central. And therefore, my whole life with Fernando Rendon, in the World Poetry Movement, with the Revolutionary Poet Brigades in San Francisco and the other, is to make poetry become the greatest weapon in the future. There is nothing more futural for the world than poetry. What is more beautiful than an object which objectifies the feeling of the human heart and soul? There is nothing more powerful to make people more human and humane.
Tú eres un poeta transgresor, radical, socialista, y se ha dicho que eres el único poeta comunista de Estados Unidos. ¿Esto es cierto?
Assolutamente no. Tanti poeti negli Stati Uniti sono comunisti. Comunista anche. In la rivoluzione, la brigata di rivoluzione dei poeti, io so 5 al meeting regolare, 11 or 12 come. 5 of them are communists. And we are not the only group, there are many groups all over the country. But that's funny. No, but of course, but you know that we have all of this game that's going on now, where the racketeer president, Trump, is now they're going to impeach. They're going to impeach him. They may. You understand, this is the game that's being played by the Democrats and Republicans, which are really one party, the capitalist party. So this is the game that's played for the world in public, you see, to blind people, to keep them blindsided from real revolutionary understanding. That's why, for example, the poem Act by Roque Dalton is really like a great communist poem for any era, for any time.
El poema que has leído de Roque Dalton es absolutamente contemporáneo con los acontecimientos de América Latina en este momento.
Everywhere, don't forget, 6 million people live in the streets. And I'm sure in many countries in the world, that's the case. So what does it mean? It means we've got to fight to change it, to make the world a better place, a freer place, because that's not liberty, that's slavery. That's slavery. When 6 million people are living in the streets, you're living in a society that's a slave society.
Bueno, esto lo has hecho también con tu literatura. Tu literatura, tu poesía es un manifiesto permanente ante estas situaciones de desigualdades. Pero yo te quería preguntar también tu trabajo más independiente, porque no solamente has publicado en las grandes editoriales, también le has apostado a lo que hoy en América Latina se trabaja mucho. Los jóvenes poetas trabajan las plaquettes, los libros independientes, y él siempre lo hizo desde el inicio.
Most everything that I publish has been in a small. City Lights is the biggest publisher. The only book that I published in the academic world was my first book when I was a teacher in the university world. That's the Borghese world. And I published A Correspondence of Americans. My first book was published in the academic world. Otherwise, everything was at the level of the street publishers, like many poets in Ecuador. Well, sure. But those books of poems can be weapons of change in a very deep sense. That's what this particular period is all about. We're having now so much communication all over the world instantaneously. We are receptors of great possibility. And I don't think I'm being too chauvinist to say I think the poem is the real great weapon. The human poem is the real great weapon, because we all know what it is to sing a song with others, that feeling that you have when you're singing all together. And don't forget, a poem is a song. What Rilke said was correct. Gesang ist Dasein. Song is being. Song is existence.
Dylan Thomas.
Well, I will surprise you. I was at Dylan Thomas's last reading. Dylan Thomas read at my college, which was the City College of New York. This was a poor boys' college, not the Columbia University elite. This is a poor boys' college. Dylan Thomas came in November 1953, and he read. We all had already heard him on record, and even bought his book. But he came in and he read only Thomas Hardy and William Butler Yeats. So when the class was nearly over, we all yelled out, "What about your work?" And he said, "Oh, you know my work." And then he proceeded to read his work for another hour, so we all played hooky. We never went to the next class. We never went anywhere. We stayed with Dylan, and listen to it. Dylan Thomas was the great, beautiful that you brought him up. Dylan Thomas was the great shaman. He was not just a poet, he was a great shaman. You know shaman, the shaman. He was a great shaman. He was, and to show you that I loved him so much, I'm going to read you the poem I wrote him right here for Dylan Thomas. That wind the water vowels, whirled from the singing bones of him who reaped a world of music in the throat's harp and sainted heaven in the grottos of the ear, raptures me yet, fans with bellowing flame the woebegone blood, and cancels elegy in the morning band night. That pen sprung from the poetry of seas, has scrolled the Bibles of a child on rusted leaves and made them fly, has slashed the curtained anarchy of crippled sound and cryptic word, and swallowed empty scriptures in the deluge of its breath. That death, the crumbling of a brain, the mouth whose issue made the stained glass holy, while cold November rain wrapped fate. I do not lament, for in the poverty of days I am swollen by the full-blown cantos from the mouth of the choir of the bell-ringing dead. Also, I must say, I was invited by the family of Dylan Thomas to Swansea, Wales, for the 50th anniversary of his death in 2013. In 1953, the most avant-garde place culturally in New York City was Cinema 16, which was experimental movies. This was before the Beat Generation, which came 3 years later. Dylan Thomas had worked at the BBC during the war when a very young man. He worked on documentary movies, and so he was going to give a lecture. After the reading that he gave at City College, he went downtown to give a lecture at Cinema 16, and then he went to the White Horse Cafe, and he drank, and they found him in the street. They said that he drank himself to death. No, but that wasn't the truth. The truth was Dylan Thomas was a diabetic who never checked on his diabetes. And he went into a diabetic coma, and he died 10 days later of a serious pneumonia. He died of pneumonia 10 days later after his wife and kids came to visit him from Wales. They came over to visit him from Wales.
Bueno, Jack, ha sido un placer, un gusto enorme que nos acompañes en Guayaquil y que estés en Entre Artes. Gracias por tu poesía, gracias por tu presencia y bienvenido. Welcome to Guayaquil siempre.
Gracias, Bella. It's great to be with you here and with also the compañera. And I'm going to read 3 poems.
Thank you. Gracias.
New York, New York. It's big, it's ugly, I hate it, I love it, I'm free, oh talk to me, can't you hear me? I can't leave it, I'll do anything for it. It's so big, it's filthy, it's so sweet, I adore it, I'm staying, I'll never leave, it's in me, it's so cruel, I hate it, I love it, it's mine, I own it, it's mine. Again and again I say, I hate war, I love it, it's disgusting, it's awesome, I love it, I won't go, I promise, it's beautiful, talk to me, can't you hear me loving? Oh, it's so brutal, it's so shit. Talk to me, tell me what I should do, anything, it's marvelous, I'll never stop loving it. Never, 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 never. Whatever it's called, I snow before my time. I cover the pockmarked streets with the black breaths of my birthday. I know why it is best and why the valley is radiant. There's an old woman on that corner holding out a pack of cigarettes that she got from a man for her shawl, who got it from a thief for a bicycle part, who stole it from the pocket of an American businessman who's arranging to build a computer parts factory on the outskirts of Moscow. She's all rags. Her hand is out. I fall on her shabby coat, on her nose, on her eyelashes. In a room across the street, a man of 50 just stops breathing in his chair. A cheap little samovar of a woman clips her stockings to her garter, smooths down her dress, sprays some black market perfume on her neck, and goes downstairs to walk the streets. Her heels are what's left of the Red Army. I bury her on 1,000 corners and freeze her and her sisters into statues. My name was changed long ago. She is my name, and the man in the room no longer breathing, and the woman who sells stolen cigarettes. I snow, even in the room. I bury him in my black breaths. This is the true requiem. Slava to the glorious, victorious revolution. Stalingrad, or whatever it's called, is triumphant. I fall and fall. I slowly cover all with my black breaths. And finally, path. Go to your broken heart. If you think you don't have one, get one. To get one, be sincere. Learn sincerity of intent by letting life enter, because you're helpless really to do otherwise. Even as you try escaping, let it take you and tear you open like a letter sent, like a sentence inside you waited for all your life, though you've committed nothing. Let it send you up. Let it break you, heart. Broken-heartedness is the beginning of all real reception. The ear of humility hears beyond the gates. See the gates opening. Feel your hands going akimbo on your hips. Your mouth opening like a womb giving birth to your voice for the first time. Go singing, whirling into the glory of being ecstatically simple. Write the poem.